When Japan's war machine finally began to crumble in the Pacific, thousands of Japanese soldiers found themselves trapped with no supplies, no communication, and no hope of rescue. Many were captured on islands like Saipan, Guam, and Okinawa. These men, trained to believe that surrender was dishonor, entered captivity in disbelief and shame. They expected torture, starvation, or execution at the hands of the Americans, whom wartime propaganda had painted as monsters. Yet, what awaited them was something entirely different. As U.S. transports carried them to POW camps, many feared their last day was near. They had no idea they were about to experience something that would challenge everything they had been taught. But instead of brutality, they were met with organization, medical care, and even courtesy. For men who had been taught that the enemy was inhuman, the first moments of capture marked the beginning of an unexpected journey, from fear to astonishment, and eventually, to reflection on the true nature of their foes. When the first Japanese POWs arrived on American soil, they were met with fences, guards, and barbed wire, but also with order, cleanliness, and food. The camps were not brutal dungeons but organized communities run under the Geneva Convention. Instead of beatings, they were given soap, clothes, and medical checks. Some POWs wept as they were handed clean bed sheets, unable to believe this was real. American officers instructed guards to treat prisoners with decency, partly to uphold moral standards, and partly to encourage intelligence cooperation. The atmosphere, while militarized, felt surreal to men who had been told they'd be slaughtered. Many prisoners later recalled that the first warm meal they received in captivity felt more shocking than their capture itself. In that moment, fear began to give way to confusion, and the seeds of a profound cultural awakening were quietly planted. For weeks, the Japanese soldiers lived in quiet confusion. They saw American guards joke, smoke, and play baseball, not rage-filled killers as they expected. Even more shocking, they were given hot meals 3 times a day, simple but hearty dishes like stew, bread, and eggs. For soldiers who had eaten bark and worms in jungles, the taste of real food was overwhelming. One recalled later, "We thought we were in heaven or some trick was being played." The Americans wanted to show that even enemies could be treated as men, not beasts. This unexpected humanity broke psychological barriers faster than any interrogation. Some POWs began to question everything they had been told about the West, realizing that strength could exist without cruelty. Mealtime, once a reminder of war's hunger, became the first bridge between two worlds that had only known each other through hatred. It happened gradually. American cooks began introducing POWs to Western foods unfamiliar to Japanese taste buds. One sunny afternoon, at a camp in Texas, a group of POWs was served something wrapped in soft bread with meat inside. They didn't know it yet, but they were tasting their first hamburger. At first, they hesitated, suspicious, cautious, even fearful. Then one brave soldier took a bite. The smoky beef, the melted cheese, the crunch of lettuce, it was unlike anything they had known. Within minutes, laughter and chatter replaced silence. For men who thought America was heartless, this simple sandwich became a symbol of humanity. Some even asked for seconds, amazed that their captors would share such comfort food with them. That day, the hamburger did more than fill stomachs. It began to melt years of propaganda and mistrust, one bite at a time. If the hamburger amazed them, Coca-Cola absolutely mystified them. To many POWs, this dark, fizzy liquid seemed like something from science fiction. When handed glass bottles, they stared at the bubbles in awe. The first sip sent shivers down their throats, a mix of sweetness and sharp fizz they had never experienced. Some coughed, some smiled, others looked around as if expecting poison. But soon, laughter erupted. A few asked for seconds. In diaries discovered later, one POW wrote, "That strange black drink tasted like joy." For men who had lost everything, Coca-Cola became a spark of forgotten emotion. It reminded them, if only for a moment, of life beyond war, of youth, family, and innocence left behind. That single bottle became more than a drink. It was a sip of peace in a world torn apart. What followed surprised even American guards. Some Japanese prisoners began to cry quietly as they ate and drank. To outsiders, it was just food. But to these men, it symbolized something deeper, the realization that their enemies were not demons. One prisoner sobbed, saying, "We were lied to. They are not the devils we were told about." For soldiers who had been prepared to die for the emperor, this kindness from an enemy broke their emotional armor. They wept for their families, their country, and the falsehoods they had believed. It was a meal that turned into a moment of spiritual collapse. In that moment, many began to see the war not as a divine mission, but as a human tragedy shared by all sides. The simple act of eating together had done what no battlefield or speech ever could. It awakened empathy in the hearts of former enemies. The U.S. military allowed POWs to write censored letters home, mostly short messages about their well-being. Many wrote things like, "We are treated kindly," or "We eat better here than we did in the army." Those letters shocked Japanese families when they arrived months later. Civilians, struggling to find rice in Japan, couldn't believe their captured sons were eating hamburgers in America. Japanese censors tried to hide these letters, fearing they'd weaken morale. But whispers spread through surviving units. America wasn't the cruel place their leaders had described. The war's psychological wall began to crack. For the first time, doubt seeped into the rigid code of absolute loyalty. These quiet letters, carried across oceans, did more damage to wartime propaganda than any bomb ever could. Over time, POW began to learn English phrases, American songs, and even sports. Baseball, in particular, became a bridge between enemies. Guards and prisoners played side by side, laughing like old friends. Some POW volunteered for farm work, amazed at the trust shown to them outside the fences. They began to admire American efficiency, teamwork, and freedom. It was culture shock of the best kind, an education through kindness. When they learned that American soldiers also wrote letters to mothers and sweethearts, they realized how similar humans were, no matter the flag. Some POW later said those games and small talks taught them more about America than any book ever could. They began sketching, writing poetry, and even teaching each other, rediscovering a sense of purpose beyond war. By the war's end, many no longer saw themselves as mere prisoners, but as men reborn through unexpected compassion. By 1944, Japanese POWs across the U.S. began forming study groups, debating philosophy, and rethinking nationalism. Some even wrote essays rejecting militarism. A few collaborated with U.S. officials to create anti-war propaganda for Japan, urging surrender to save lives. These were not acts of betrayal, but awakening. They had seen a side of America that propaganda could never show, a nation that conquered not only with might, but with compassion. For many, the hamburger and Coke were not just food, they were metaphors for freedom, diversity, and comfort that Japan's war ideology had denied them. Some spoke of rebuilding Japan with new values once they returned home. Others began studying democracy, curious how individual rights could coexist with national pride. In a quiet, unexpected way, America's hospitality had become its most powerful weapon of influence. To the American guards, it was strange at first. They had been trained to hate the Japanese after Pearl Harbor and brutal battles in the Pacific. Yet here they were, handing out sandwiches to those same men. Some guards admitted feeling conflicted. Others felt proud to represent American decency. A few even developed friendships with POWs, teaching them jokes or sharing cigarettes. Many realized that kindness could disarm hatred more effectively than bullets. For both sides, the camps became unexpected spaces of reflection, where humanity quietly triumphed over vengeance. Some guards later said those experiences changed how they saw war forever. They learned that winning hearts could be just as powerful as winning battles. Historians later called it culinary diplomacy. Without realizing it, the U.S. had used food to soften ideological walls. The hamburger, an icon of American culture, symbolized abundance and simplicity. Coca-Cola, with its effervescent sweetness, symbolized joy and modernity. These weren't just snacks, they were experiences of another civilization's soul. When the POWs tasted them, they weren't just eating, they were seeing a different way of life. Years later, some former POW confessed that it was during those meals that they began to question everything they had fought for. They realized that culture could be more persuasive than propaganda and kindness more enduring than conquest. All food, in its simplest form, had become a silent ambassador of American values. Through every bite and sip, a quiet kind of peace was being served. When Japan finally surrendered in August 1945, many POW left not just from relief, but confusion. They had changed. They were no longer the same men who marched into battle chanting for the emperor. Boarding ships back to Japan, they carried memories of hamburgers, Coke bottles, and American kindness. They also carried guilt, knowing that their own country had told them lies. As they watched the American coastline fade, some vowed never to forget what they learned, that true strength lay not in hatred, but humanity. In the years that followed, a few of them became teachers, writers, and advocates for peace. Their stories stood as living proof that even in war, compassion could rebuild what violence had destroyed. Back in Japan, returning POWs were treated with suspicion, even contempt. They were viewed as shameful survivors rather than heroes. Yet, quietly, they began to share their experiences. They spoke of decent treatment, clean clothes, and unbelievable food. Some were ridiculed, others ignored. But among the younger generation, their words planted seeds of curiosity about America. In time, those memories became part of Japan's post-war transformation, from militarism to modern democracy. What began with a hamburger and a Coke became part of a global shift in perception. Many of these former POWs later supported Japan's alliance with the U.S., believing mutual respect was the foundation of peace. Historians would later note that their stories humanized the enemy for an entire nation. In their small acts of honesty, they helped bridge two worlds once divided by fire and fear. Decades later, some former Japanese POWs returned to the U.S. as tourists. They visited the same campgrounds, now quiet fields or museums. They met descendants of the guards who once watched over them and shared meals again, this time as equals. Many broke down in tears recalling that moment when the taste of Coligat first made them erect, when Lactoso of Coca-Cola had first made them cry. The simple foods that once represented enemy culture now symbolized reconciliation. History, it seemed, had come full circle. Some laid flowers where their barracks once stood, whispering prayers of gratitude instead of regret. Others shared stories with American schoolchildren, teaching them that kindness can outlast war. In those peaceful reunions, the legacy of hamburgers and Coke lived on, not as symbols of victory, but of shared humanity. Today, historians look back at those camps not as footnotes, but as small laboratories of humanity in wartime. The story of Japanese POWs tasting hamburgers and Coca-Cola is more than a curiosity. It shows how empathy can bridge oceans in a world still scarred by conflict. This story reminds us that sometimes peace doesn't begin with treaties or speeches, but with a shared meal between former enemies. A hamburger, a Coke, and a tear. That's how humanity won a quiet battle during World War II. These moments proved that compassion could be as transformative as any weapon. The lessons born in those camps would echo through generations of diplomacy and cultural exchange. And long after the guns fell silent, the taste of kindness lingered, sweet, simple, and unforgettable.